Well, I just got a pair of the brand new HomePod Generation 2 from Apple. I got them both in white, matching pair. Gonna be comparing it to my old HomePod, and especially comparing it to several home theater setups I have around the house. I have a Sonos Arc and Sonos Sub, a Sonos Beam and Sub Mini, and a full 7.1 Dolby Atmos surround setup in a room, and I want to see how they all compare when playing movies and TV shows, especially with Dolby Atmos. Plus I want to compare a bunch of classical works that I've always loved and see how they sound on these as opposed to the old ones and the other speakers around the house. They get pretty heavy after a while. Let's actually start with pricing. I'm going to use a pair of new HomePods at $600 as the comparison for the rest of this video. A pair of HomePods sounds significantly better than just one. And if you're going to be using it for Dolby Atmos and a home theater setup, you need a pair. So while one HomePod does sound good, I think that's a separate comparison. I'm going to be using a pair of HomePods, $600. Now you can take a pair of Sonos One SLs, and that's cheaper. It's around $400 something, but I will say unequivocally, I have a pair of One SLs. The HomePod 2 and a pair sound way better. So you cannot get a better sounding speaker from Sonos that is also cheaper. Now, if we look at the soundbars plus subs, a Sonos Beam is $450. But again, a Sonos Beam by itself and even a Sonos Arc by itself does not sound as good as a pair of HomePod 2s. The bass response is just not there. I used a Sonos Arc by itself for several months listening to movies and listening to music. Did not sound very good. The bass just wasn't there. So to make an actually competitive comparison, I do think you need to have the Sonos Beam and Sub Mini, which I have set up in a bedroom, and the Sonos Arc and the big Sonos Sub Gen 3, which I also have. Now the Sub Mini is actually around $430, so you're looking at close to $900 for a Sonos Beam and Sub Mini. Sometimes you can get it on sale, maybe down to $800 or even $700, but again, still more expensive than a pair of HomePod 2s. Sonos Arc, even more so. The Arc is typically $900, sometimes you can get it on sale for $800. The big Gen 3 Sub is $750, so you're talking about $1,650 or around there for the Sonos Arc and the larger Sub. Again, keep that in context. $1,600 for the Sonos Arc and Sub versus $600, $1,000 less for a pair of HomePod 2s. Keep those values in mind as we compare them for music and movies, because I think when you look at value, if you're going to buy one piece of equipment for a living room or even a bedroom, the price does matter. I'm also going to compare my full Dolby Atmos 7.1 setup. I have 4 in-ceiling speakers, left, right, center, and a sub with a Denon receiver, but you're looking at $2,500, $2,800 or more for a setup like that. And that's not any installation or wiring. I did that all myself as we built the house, so it might be even more expensive depending on your situation. So let's talk about music. I can't play the music I listened to in this video because YouTube, copyright, and all that, but I do have an Apple Music playlist in the description of this video if you want to listen. I did get a bunch of recommendations from people on Twitter and Mastodon, so thank you for those. I included them in the playlist. But I really went back to Snarky Puppy. It's kind of a jazz fusion artist. They have a track called Lingus. I listened to that because there's great bass response, there's horns, lots of instruments, and I listened to that on all these different setups. I also listened to Gustav Holst's The Planets classical work, specifically the Mars and Jupiter movements. Those are just movements I'm really familiar with, and so I can tell the differences on all the speakers. Now when it comes to music listening, I do think HomePod 2 is one of the best sounding speakers that I'm comparing, except for the Sonos Arc and the larger Sub Gen 3. Again, that system from Sonos is $1,600. But it does sound incredible. It's very immersive. It will use Dolby Atmos to kind of do a virtual surround effect. It's not technically spatial audio, that's for the HomePods, but it does really feel like that, especially in a larger room. So best music listening experience, probably the Sonos Arc and Sub, but the HomePods are really a close second, and depending on the size of your room, you might not be able to tell that much of a difference. One of my tests when it comes to music is the Lacrimosa movement from Mozart's Requiem, one of my favorite pieces again, and there is a very soft string entrance, just a single chord. If I can hear that clearly on whatever speakers I'm listening to, those speakers win it for me. I'm going to play it real quick. Hopefully the copyright doesn't catch it. That's always a good first impression. Now listening to music on the Sonos Beam and Sub Mini, also a really good experience, and I'm going to talk about all the AirPlay and smart home features in a second. But the Beam and Sub Mini, while it sounded nice, it was not as immersive, and I did not find it as pleasurable as even the HomePod 2s. And remember, a Sonos Beam and Sub Mini is still about $880. It did sound good, but I preferred the HomePod 2. A quick word about the original HomePods. I have 3 of the original HomePods, one in a stereo pair setup. Listening to music on both the old ones, the OGs, and the new HomePod 2, I did find the bass to be a little punchier on the older HomePods. They were placed in a different room and the surface that they were on was a little different as well. So all those factors can change the sound. But listening to that Lingus track from Snarky Puppy, it did feel like the bass was a little punchier and a little clearer on the older HomePods. But I will say, the HomePod 2 pair, the clarity of the highs and just overall pleasure of listening, and we're going to get to movies in a second like dialogue, I did find the HomePod 2s had more clarity than the original HomePods. Plus there's so many other benefits like the faster Siri and all that. But just a word if you're comparing the two directly. It does make a little bit of a difference when you're watching movies as well. I used the original HomePods, the OGs, a pair of them to watch movies, and it sounded really good, especially because of that bass. And I just find that the HomePod 2's bass is different. I don't know if it's worse. Again, surface, room, all of that comes into play, but I did really like the bass on the OG HomePods when listening to music in my testing. So for music, ranking the systems top to bottom, I think the Sonos Arc and Sub is the best experience, also the most expensive at $1,600. The HomePod 2s, a pretty close second depending on your environment. And again, pricing is $600 versus $1,600, a great value. The Sonos Beam and Sub Mini come in third place, and I'll actually put my entire Dolby Atmos 7.1 system in last place. Number one, just because playing music to it can be a little cumbersome, and I actually found you'd have to fiddle with the surround settings, and depending on you're doing Dolby Atmos or surround or multi-channel in, it was just more cumbersome and didn't enjoy listening to music on the 7.1. So I'm going to put that in last place. But when it comes to movies, my full 7.1 Dolby Atmos system does take first place. Again, looking at cost and value, it is the most expensive system I have. You can't beat the separation. I have 4 in-ceiling speakers, so the height and the surrounds are both all individuals. I have a nice clipped center channel and subwoofer, so it just sounds great. You really can't beat it. Now for my movie test, I watched the same scene from Avengers Infinity War on all the different systems. It's that scene where Doctor Strange and Iron Man 1v1 Thanos, one after another. It's a pretty great scene, pretty great audio effects, especially for the surrounds. So I tested that on each system right in a row. Now when it comes to second place, the Sonos Arc and Gen 3 Sub also take it. It's an incredible movie experience. Dolby Atmos, it really does feel like it's coming from behind you and from the sides, even in a larger room. For movie watching, again, it is really good. I'll talk about setup and some of the other features as well, but movie watching, the Dolby Atmos 7.1 system, then the Sonos Arc. For third place, I actually have to put the Sonos Beam and Sub Mini ahead of the HomePod 2s. Again, HomePods do an incredible job at Dolby Atmos and surround when you're watching movies, but the Sonos Beam and Sub Mini, it's just really tuned for movies. Like it just feels like a great movie experience. I have that in a bedroom, so a slightly smaller room, and it just works. So for movie watching, I do have to put the HomePod 2s in last place in this comparison, but they still sound great. I don't want that to deter you from thinking about using these for movies, and that's going to come to my final statements too. A lot of times you're buying one system for multi-purposes, music and movies, maybe also smart home, using it for home assistant. So having that full picture of the value, I think should go into your buying decision. And we'll talk about that in a second. When it comes to smart home and virtual assistant, these Sonos systems, some of them do work with Amazon Echo Assistant. They actually have their own system now where you can say, "Hey Sonos." I'm going to leave that in because I don't think I'm going to set anybody's Sonos system off by saying that. I don't even know if anybody has it enabled. But there is more flexibility for music services when you use the Sonos system. So if you're a heavy Spotify user, that's where you listen to all your music. Using a Sonos system might actually be more advantageous, a little easier to play Spotify. You can set it as default and even for that, "Hey Sonos." But the Sonos speakers are also not really a smart home hub, unlike the new HomePod. The new HomePod 2 is Matter supported, so Matter devices will work with it. It has Thread connectivity for super fast communication between your smart home devices, and Siri is noticeably faster. The HomePod 2 has the S7 chip, the HomePod Mini has the S5, and the old HomePod had an A8. I did a little side-by-side test, even just asking HomePod the weather, the big OG HomePod versus the new HomePod 2, and it is a stark difference. Check it out. Hey Siri, what's the weather today?
Should be sunny today. Daytime temperatures will hover around 77 degrees, with overnight lows around 55 degrees.
Still working.
I also tested controlling HomeKit devices and running a shortcut, and the new HomePod is just super fast. It's such a breath of fresh air using Siri on this device as opposed to the old original HomePod. So when it comes to smart home, the HomePod does beat the Sonos system. If you're getting a Sonos, it's just because you're getting a speaker. Plus all the integrations with Siri and Siri shortcuts that you can run from a HomePod, it does bring a lot of value to HomePod 2. And for the final category, This is just about experience and ecosystem. One of the nice things I like about the Sonos Beam and the Sonos Arc is because they're really intended for home theater viewing and to be paired with a television. There's some really cool accessories and features. For instance, I have my Beam and Arc mounted to the TV. Both TVs are mounted on the wall, and they sell this bracket where you can actually put the soundbar hanging from the bottom of the TV. You don't have to attach it to the wall separately. You don't need a shelf. It can just hang there. It's a really clean look, and I like that there's an entire world of accessories kind of built around that home theater experience for Sonos. I also like that every Sonos device can be plugged in via Ethernet, not just Wi-Fi. The new HomePod has Wi-Fi 4 or N, which is fine most of the time, but when it comes to using it for a home theater experience and latency, I would love to put physical Ethernet into everything I can. I have my Sonos Arc plugged in physically to Ethernet. I wish I had ran Ethernet cables for my Sonos subs because, and here's a knock on the Sonos ecosystem, there are some connectivity issues at times. Many times the Sonos Sub Gen 3 and my Sub Mini will just kind of disappear from my Sonos app. Sometimes they still work, sometimes I have to factory reset it, and that can be a real pain. So when it comes to connectivity, I like that it has the Ethernet option, but they're kind of flaky sometimes too, so kind of thumbs down on that for Sonos. Of course, all these Sonos devices support AirPlay 2, and I do find that AirPlay 2 works great across the entire house. I can put everything through HomePods, the Sonos Beams and Arcs, and it all works great. So AirPlay 2 works really well with Sonos and HomePod if you have a house with both, like I do. That being said, the HomePod 2 has a lot of features, especially if you're in the Apple ecosystem and you got everything Apple like I do. There's some great features like there. The new Find My for your family and friends, so you can ask it the location. Running shortcuts from HomePod is great. I actually like Siri on the HomePod. I trigger lots of HomeKit scenes and automations that way, even here in the studio. How easy it is to hand off music and podcasts just by tapping your phone to a HomePod. And even features with the Apple TV like the eARC. If you have other systems plugged into your TV, let's say you have a PlayStation 5 plugged into your television, you can take the eARC channel out of your TV and into your Apple TV and use a pair of HomePod 2s for the speakers of every device connected to your TV. There might be slight latency when it comes to video games, but I actually did that for a while and it was a really good experience. So altogether, there are many benefits of the HomePod that you don't get with Sonos and are just kind of included in a smart speaker. So when it comes to ecosystem, the HomePod 2 brings a lot to the table, not just music and movie playing, and I like those features. So when it comes down to buying one of these devices, what should you choose? If money is no object and you want to set up a home theater room, then set up a whole Dolby Atmos 7.1 surround, put ceiling, in-wall speakers. It's a really great experience. Likewise, if you're spending over $2,000 or you're fine with that, a Sonos Arc and Sub 3 Gen is a great experience. But if you're in the Apple ecosystem, you use Siri, you use shortcuts, you use HomeKit, you use all the Apple stuff. Plus you want a really excellent music listening experience, and you want a really, really good movie watching experience. A pair, too, of HomePod 2s is an incredible value. And I think for a lot of people, if you just want an ease of setup, something that's nice to listen to, works with your Apple TV seamlessly, a pair of HomePod 2s can't be beat. I also don't really have connectivity issues with my HomePods. I know my Sonos Arc and subs, those can be a little flaky at times. I don't experience that flakiness with HomePod, even my original, my OG ones that are super slow. And so these new ones with the S7 chip, I have great confidence that these are going to be around and reliable for years to come. So when it comes to value, $600 does not get you a long way for both a movie setup and music in the Sonos world. And again, a pair of Sonos One SLs, not as good as a pair of HomePod 2s. So $600 for a pair of HomePods that can be both your movie theater setup and your music listening experience all together in one room, simple setup, plus all the Apple features. I really think it's incredible value. But let me know in the comments, what's your favorite music and movie watching audio experience? What are your favorite devices? And also, if you have any songs I should add to that HomePod Review Apple Music playlist, leave me a comment below. I'd love to know what you're listening to on your HomePods. And while you're here, don't forget to like this video and subscribe to the Bearded Teacher channel. Lots of tips for Apple devices, especially check out the shorts for this channel. Lots of iPhone tips there. Thanks for tuning in. I'll catch you in the next video.